going to show you how I do my English paper piecing with the EPP Iron-ons. So that's the English paper piecing shapes that have been pre-cut from the applique paper and they've got the glue on one side. So once you've got your packet of shapes, whichever shape it might be, and today I'll show you on the basic hexagon, which is the most common and popular shape. We just recognise which side is the glue side, so the shiny side if you hold it up to the light, and you're going to place the glue side onto the wrong side of your fabric. Press it with an iron. It doesn't really matter if it's steam or no steam, but just bear in mind that the paper is water soluble, so that steam will start to soften it, and we'd like it to stay as stiff as possible until we've glued our edges over. So spend 10 minutes at the ironing board and iron on all of your shapes. You can position them for fussy cutting, you can squeeze them into corners and spare scraps of fabric. The grain doesn't really matter, but you might like to line them up with patterns and things on your fabric. They are semi-transparent, so you can see through to see if you've lined them up. Once you've spent that 10 minutes at the iron, everything else in this process is now portable. So there's no need to have a table or a cutting mat or a rotary cutter or an acrylic template, anything like that. Our templates are now fused onto the fabric and they're not going to move. So then the next step is you just sit and roughly cut out with about 1/4 inch seam allowance all of your shapes. If you did have an acrylic template already and a rotary cutting mat, there's nothing to stop you doing this in a similar way, and then you could cut through 10 layers, or maybe not 10, 4 to 6 layers of fabric at once using your rotary cutter and your template. Now these are 1-inch hexagons. I'm just going to also show you some of the other sizes we keep. We have the 1.5, and this is a 1/2, and this is a teeny weeny 1/4 inch, which aren't quite available yet, but they're fun to have a go of. So I say 1/4 inch, but as the shapes get smaller, you may need to reduce that seam allowance just a bit. When you're beginning, it's good to keep it nice and a good 1/4 inch, so plenty of seam allowance until you get used to the process, and then you might find that you can go a bit smaller. 1/4 inch, we're just going to go down to about 1/8 inch. You won't go any smaller than 1/8 inch because you'll just fray out your seam allowance. Some fabrics have a very loose weave and they will just fray out. So once you've got all your shapes cut out, the next step in the process is the gluing the seam allowances over. Now if you're not into glue pens, you can stick with the method of turning the edge over and tacking through, and that's fine as well. If you use the method where you corner tack, so you just take a stitch in each corner and then pull it firm, then that doesn't really work with this technique because the paper's not quite stiff enough and it will just curl your paper in. Okay, the next step is the gluing. So we're using our fabric glue pen. The glue sticks in this are actually wider than we need, so we don't want to just use it flat on the paper because that's when you're going to get really sticky fingers. So just use the edge of your glue pen, have it out a little bit, and you're going to run the edge along the edge of your paper, no wider than the seam allowance, and then you should never get sticky fingers. It's actually quite a clean process. Try and keep it off the very join where the paper meets the fabric. Otherwise, when you're stitching by hand, you're going to be stitching through glue. And it's possible to do, but why make things harder for ourselves? So just keep it a little way away. Then I'm going to use the pad of my thumb, and you just fold until you feel the resistance of that edge, and then push down onto that glue. Now with the traditional card shapes, we were taught to push inwards really tight to get a crisp edge. You can't do that with the paper. It's not quite as strong, and you'll just roll the edge. So the motto is fold until you feel the edge and then push down onto the glue rather than pushing inwards. Do one side at a time so that your corners are also glued down. And very quickly you will have your hexagon shape glued ready to stitch. Just show you on the 1/2 inch. These are cool because it's just one press for each side, so they're nice and quick. Okay, With the larger 1.5 inch, you may like to use a table, or you can still do it in your hands. You just need to ensure that your corners don't bow out. So where you're folding on the fabric here, you need to make sure that that folds all the way into the edge of the paper. It is common to bow the ends out like that and you get a curve. Because you can't quite feel the paper, you've got to use your eye to judge that you're folding all the way in. Okay, and we're ready to sew them together. I'm going to show you how to thread an applique needle. This might sound really simple, but some people really struggle with threading their needle and may not have seen this method before. So we're using my applique needle, which has that nice lovely long eye in it. It's nice and short and fine, but it has that large eye, so the process isn't going to be that difficult. We're also using our lightweight, our 60 weight applique thread, so it's nice and fine. The general rule of thumb for threads is that you knot the end you cut. So I've just taken it off the reel and I've cut that end, so I'm going to thread this end. Now most people try and thread their needle like this, pushing those ends through that eye. They squint one eye, poke their tongue out, lick and spit and curse, and it won't go through. The better way to thread your needle is to pull that thread back between your thumb and finger, watching where it goes, but pinch it close so you can't see it anymore. Look at the eye of the needle and push it through your thumb and finger where the thread was, and it will go through the eye almost every time. Just do that once more. Pull the thread back between your thumb and finger and pinch it closed. Push the eye of the needle through and the thread will go through. Now because you've got that nice long eye, probably about 4 millimeters or a bit over 1/8 of an inch, you've got a bit of leeway. If you had a tiny milliner needle with the tiny weeny eye, which is sort of only like 1 millimeter, then you'd have to line it up exactly. But with the large eye, it will work for you every time. Tying a knot. I always start with a knot for English paper piecing, needle turn applique, and even embroidery. So it's good to know how to do a quick and easy knot. If you can tie a knot like that, like Grandma did, then stick with it. But if you really struggle to tie a knot quickly and easily, then learn this method. So we're placing the thread along the needle so you've got a closed circle. I've put the end of the thread between my thumb and finger and hold it in a circle. 3 wraps around the needle, 1, 2, 3. Slide the wraps between your thumb and finger and pull it to the end of the thread, and you'll have a nice knot there every time. If you have a very open weave fabric, do more wraps and you'll get a larger knot. I'll just show you that once more. Along the needle into a closed circle, 3 wraps, pull the wraps down the thread. Notice when I'm pulling the wraps down, I'm holding my thread here so I don't unthread the needle. Now if you haven't seen that knot before, it may be life-changing for you, so go practice, and before you know it, it'll be done without even thinking. So when I start sewing them together, I have my threaded knotted needle. I start halfway along an edge and just run it up through the seam allowance to the point that I'm going to start at. That just buries the knot out of the way so it's not right in the corner. Now this is the way I stitch my hexies together. It may not be the only way or the right way, but it's the way that I like to do it and it works for me. So you choose what works for you. I positioned the hexagons with the edges nice and neatly together along the top of my finger, and pinch it nice and tight with your thumb so you've got full control and it's not flopping around everywhere. The first stitch goes through the exact 2 points, but don't pull that too firmly because you'll gather up this running stitch here. Through the 2 points again, and then through that loop and tie a knot, and we're ready to start. Then it's simply a whip stitch. So straight across, perpendicular to the two seams. And if I've positioned them properly along the top of my finger, I can just run the needle across my finger and catch the two folds. That way, the only way I can go too deep and have my stitches showing on the front is to go through my finger. So it just makes the process a little quicker because I've got that guide of the top of my finger to position my needle each time. As you pull through, I'm pulling quite firmly. You don't want to be able to see any daylight when you open up your two pieces through the seam. So it is pulling quite firmly. And the stitches are only about 2 millimeters or a millimeter or less than 1/8 of an inch apart. Notice how the needle is going directly across. So that means on the front the thread's going straight across, and on the back it's on an angle as we move along. Now if your gluing wasn't entirely accurate because the paper's a little softer, then during this process we can fix that. Get to about halfway and look at the other end. If they weren't even, then just ease it in, and throughout the rest of the seam you'll just ease in that excess so that your end points are always perfect. There's a lot more flexibility with this paper than the traditional cards. If you didn't glue accurately with those, then you're going to end up with holes and uneven points at the ends. When we get to the end, the last stitch goes through the exact 2 points, so it's going to be perfect. Through the 2 points again, through the loop, tie a knot. So I have a knot at the beginning and at the end of every seam. That allows me, if I need to, if my next hexagon was going to go there, I can just run through this seam allowance up to the spot ready for the next one, and I'd start the same way, through the 2 points, through the 2 points again, through the loop, tie a knot, and away I go on the next seam. Ending my thread. If I was running out of thread, or if I'd simply finished, to finish I've done my double stitch and my knot at the end, but just for security I just come back a few stitches, take a stitch, take a second one, through the loop, tie a knot, and then I trim my thread. So it's just extra security, and it's putting that knot out of that corner. When I open up my piece, ideally I shouldn't be able to see any of my stitches. If I had a really dark colour perhaps, or I had contrasting colours next to each other so the thread only matched one or blended with one, you may see a very small straight stitch on the front. But I also don't want to be able to pull that and see any daylight between it. It needs to be nice and tight so it doesn't pull apart, and that will make it nice and strong. Here's a few other examples. You can see here, fussy cutting a stripe and splaying it out around the centre. Here's a 1/2 inch example, and these have been made into diamonds rather than the simple grandmother's flowers. So that's essentially how we join our English paper pieces together when they're tessellating shapes or equal shapes. Curved pieces we will deal with quite differently, but anything that's right sides together we use a whip stitch and join them like that. I hope all this information has been of use to you, and maybe you'll try out my method one day. Certainly try out the EPP Iron-ons. I think it's the most fantastic way of doing English paper piecing. No more pulling those papers out at the end. That applique paper just stays inside your project. It's not offensive if you don't wash it. It will start to soften over time just from the moisture in your hands and the moisture in the air and just from being used. But if you do wash it, the 50% soluble will dissolve, so all the stiff bits will dissolve, and it will just stay inside your project like a nice soft interfacing. Pulling the papers out of English paper piecing is the worst part of the process. It's not the fun bit. So with this way you'll never have to pull it out again. Also, your shapes and your motifs stay nice and stable. You're not fraying the edges of the fabric as you try and get that glue up and pull the papers out. So everything stays nicely in place and nice and crisp and usable until you've finished your project. Hope you've enjoyed it, and please send me photos or shoot me an email anytime with what you thought of the process. Bye.